without further ado, I want to announce our next speaker who's been also in the Cluj ecosystem for quite a while. So Luc Mawbey is a highly accomplished engineering leader and a true expert in AI and big data technology. And he has worked all across the globe in both developed and emerging markets. And right now he's the VP of engineering at ComplyAdvantage, and he oversees the engineering teams both in London and Cluj. And what I learned is for many companies, he has the biggest office here in Cluj, and he is like growing that team aggressively here. So he's spending, I don't know, he said like more than 20 trips already to Cluj. So I'm very happy to welcome him here and that he can share how he can use technology to fight corruption. Luc, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much also for hosting a workshop after this. So I'm looking forward to learn more at this talk. Thank you very much, Luc. Please give him a hand of applause.
All right. Thanks, Philip. I wanted to start today with a question. Can everyone put their hand up if they've had to pay a bribe at some stage? If you've had to pay a bribe. If someone solicited a bribe, if you've had to pay extra money to get a public service. Yeah, I think I'm seeing about half the audience. So today I'm going to talk about how we need to fight corruption with technology. And I hope that it's a topic that's relevant to some of you and of interest to you. So what I want to talk about is to go into a little bit of detail about corruption and money laundering. And I want to talk about why technology is an essential tool in the fight against these crimes, and how we can use some of the new technologies that are available in this fight. Things like distributed systems, big data, machine learning. Some of the technologies that previous presenters have talked to you about today, we'll be talking about how we apply them at ComplyAdvantage. Corruption is insidious. Corruption robs a society of public services and utilities. It strips out funding from healthcare systems, from educational services. It can mean that a free education system is no longer free if we have to start to pay a fee to get our children enrolled. And when it applies to a healthcare system, it means that conditions, illnesses, diseases that we know are treatable, that there are solutions for, that people can't access those solutions, that they can't access the drugs and the treatment required to get better. And the impact of that is that people will die from that lack of funding. Corruption has a direct correlation with death. Corruption kills people. When corruption happens at the senior level of government, when it strips out massive funds from public services, it means that the officials working in those services often get paid below their wage, and they need to find a way to supplement their income. And far, far too often, these officials turn to corruption themselves. They start demanding bribes themselves. And so free services are no longer free. Corruption breeds more corruption. When we have officials at the top levels of government that are corrupt, if you're earning, say, 1,000 or 2,000 euros a month, and someone pays you a bribe of 2 million euros, you can't just go out and buy a house. Someone will notice that. That's inconsistent with your earnings. The source of wealth is not justified. And so if you're that official, if you've embezzled public funds, if you've received a massive bribe, then you need to do something to hide that money. You need to launder the money. You need to find a way of making it seem justifiable, or at least putting it away for safekeeping for a time when you can actually use it. You need to engage in the process of money laundering. So if we can find a way to detect and prevent money laundering, then we can have a massive impact on corruption. So I want to talk a little bit about how big is the problem of corruption and money laundering. So it's estimated, and it's only an estimate, that $1.5 trillion is paid in bribes each year by people and companies. That $3 trillion is laundered each year. Money laundering includes things far beyond corruption. And it is estimated that somewhere between 1 and 3% of the money that is laundered each year is detected and possibly recovered. Now, I don't know about you, But if someone says to me they've got a solution, they've got a tool that addresses a problem, that fixes a problem, and it's successful in 1 to 3% of cases, I think they're failing. I don't think that tool is fit for purpose. I don't think that what we have today to address money laundering is doing its job, and we need to find better ways to deal with it. So, how do we do this? Every financial institution, every bank has an obligation to make sure that their business and their financial network is not used for financial crime. And one of the ways they can do that is by understanding the background of the people that use their services, of their customers. So when you open an account with a bank or use a financial service, the first thing the bank wants to know is about your history. And particularly, have you been involved in any financial crimes before? Have you been involved in terrorism? Have you financed terrorism? Is there any reason to suspect that you've been involved in money laundering, bribery, corruption, human trafficking, any sort of crime that would mean that, or give them cause to suspect, that you may be using their service for illegitimate purposes, that by allowing you to use their service, they may be enabling these crimes. And so banks have an obligation to do this. So they want to know whether you've got any history of financial crime. The other thing they want to know is whether you've got any involvement in politics. And the reason for that is that politicians hold a special place in society. Politicians have power and influence over how public funds are spent. And as an impact of this, they are at a heightened risk of bribery and corruption. So it's important for every financial institution to know which of their customers are politicians. Now, just because someone's a politician doesn't mean that they're corrupt. We need to go into more detail. We need to understand a lot more about them. Where are they from? What jurisdiction are they from? What's the prevalence of corruption in their jurisdiction? Are they from somewhere like Libya, where corruption is fairly common, or are they from Denmark, where it's not? How much power and how much influence do they have over public funds? Are they a president, where they can access billions upon billions of dollars, or are they a mayor, where their access to public funds may be more limited? What level of scrutiny are they under? Whilst your mayor might not have as much access to public funds compared to your president, the president will be under far more scrutiny, and so it'll be harder for them to get away with any corrupt practices. And is there any extra information we have about them that would lead us to believe that they have previously been involved in corruption or any other type of financial crime? Okay, I'm going to ask for another show of hands. How many of you have heard of Sorin Vulpescu? Not many people. Maria Veliciasa? No. What about Eleanor Udrea? Okay, I think a few of you have. So if Eleanor comes and she wants to deposit €300,000 in your bank, you're probably going to ask questions as to where this money comes from. But if Maria comes along and deposits €300,000, you may not be quite so wise, and you may not realise that Maria is actually Eleanor's mother. Eleanor's probably smart enough not to deposit €300,000 in her own bank account. So it's important that we know not just the people that are directly involved in politics and financial crime, but also their network, their family, their friends, their business partners. You know, who might they be involved with? Who might they be cooperating with to receive or send illicit funds? And so this problem becomes much more massive. And it's important for banks and financial institutions to have access to this information in a quick and ready way every time they onboard a customer and every time they process a payment. And fundamentally, that's the sort of problem that we're looking to solve at ComplyAdvantage. So what does this look like in practice? A lot of this information sounds like it might be difficult to access. It's not. All of this information that I've talked to you about so far is in the public domain. So if we look at this paragraph, former Tourism Minister Eleanor Udrea. First off, we have an immediate implication that Eleanor is a politician. Former Tourism Minister Eleanor Udrea currently prosecuted in several corruption cases, so there's an immediate link to crime. We know we have reason to suspect, or we have at least cause for concern, that Eleanor may have been involved in corruption. Here's another one. So this paragraph is talking about road maintenance in Bucharest from a bit over 10 years ago. So a bunch of roads will be maintained by the company of Dan and Soren, who were former business partners of Doron Kokosh, husband of Eleanor. So we're starting to see Dan and Soren, former business partners, we have a relationship, we're starting to build a network, a link. Doron, husband of Eleanor. So we've got reason to believe that Eleanor is involved in corruption. We know that Eleanor was married to Doron, and we know that Doron has, we have reason to believe we have a piece of information that may cause us to consider whether there's a relationship between Doron and Soren. Okay? So what we need to do is collect all this information. We need to process it, we need to distill it so that it's readily and easily accessible, and so it's easy for companies to understand and to use this information whenever someone tries to open a bank account or whenever they try to make a payment. Now, there are traditional providers that do this, and typically they do it by analysing information and analysing documents and articles in the public domain and extracting information from it. And typically one analyst can go through about 120 articles a day. So if you build a warehouse and you put 200 analysts in that warehouse, you can get through 24,000 articles or documents every day, which sounds okay, except when you think about the amount of information that is published on a daily basis, that you're not even going to keep up with the new information, and you're not going to be able to go back and reconsider old information from 10 and 20 years ago, and information that you may not have looked at to date. So this system is fundamentally not going to work. You're not able to keep up with the volume of information that's coming through. We need a different solution. We need to look to technology to help us fight against these crimes. So what I'd like to do is walk you through the system that we've built at ComplyAdvantage that allows us to do this at scale. And so I mentioned before that banks need to consider all the information that's in the public domain. And I'm going to make an assumption that that information is effectively synonymous with the internet. So the first thing we need to do is download all the information on the internet, and then we need to analyse it for any signs or any information about money laundering, about politicians, and about linkages and relationships and networks between them. Okay? So downloading the internet. The way we do this is we look at our friends at Apache, and Apache have a couple of fantastic projects, one of which is Nutch. Nutch is an industrial-sized, scalable web crawler, and Nutch sits on top of Hadoop. How many people have used or know about Hadoop? Yeah, a couple. Okay, so Hadoop is essentially a cluster system, and what it does is it allows you to get a collection of computers and to share the resources to do a job. And so you can share the CPU cycles, the memory, the disk space, and such like. And so what you do is you put your job on top of Hadoop, and it will break it down into a section of tasks. And it will distribute those tasks across your cluster. So as the data you need to analyze grows, as your job gets bigger and bigger, as the job gets more and more complex, what you can do is grow your cluster, and it can keep up with the volume of information that you're processing and analyzing. So we're using this to download the internet and to download all the information we need on financial crime. But it's a bunch of unstructured documents and articles. It's all in free text. The first thing we're going to do is chuck it onto a queue. And here we use Apache Kafka. At ComplyAdvantage, we're a little bit in love with Apache projects, as you might see. How many people have used Kafka? Just one or two, not too many. Okay, Kafka's a fantastic system. It allows us, Kafka's a queuing system combined with a pub-sub system combined with streaming data. So essentially what we can do is we can throw huge amounts of data at Kafka, and Kafka will catch it all, and then it will store it all, and you can then subscribe to that queue or that topic. And so you can have more than one subscriber to a queue, and Kafka will make sure that every subscriber has access to the documents and the data that you put on that queue at the rate that the subscriber can process it at. Okay? So we've thrown all these web pages onto this Kafka queue, and now we're going to start to analyze them. And the first part of the analysis is to extract the names of people and companies, and we use the natural language processing system known as named entity recognition to do this. Now, named entity recognition typically will recognize names and places and times and such like. We're just using it to recognize the name of people and of companies. within a block of text. So if you think back to the previous slide when we had a paragraph about Eleanor Udrea, it would try to identify Eleanor as a person, and it would tag that for us. So once we've extracted the names of people and companies, we then need to determine some information about them. And there's three things that we're trying to decide. Whether they're a politician, we're trying to work out if there's any implication of a relationship from the text that we're analysing, and we're trying to work out whether there's any implication of crime from the article. And for each of these three detectors, we're using a machine learning trained algorithm. So basically what we're doing is we're taking hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of sentences and paragraphs and articles, like on the previous slide, and we're annotating them, and we're telling the algorithm what the correct outcome is for these particular articles, whether this article implies that someone's a politician, or whether it implies that there's a relationship, or whether it implies that someone is involved in financial crime. And we're allowing it to train and to work out how to break up the parts of speech and to make an accurate analysis of whether this text is useful and whether it implies anything about financial crime that we need to know. So we've got these three detectors, and we bucket all this up with our named entity recognition, and we call this system ComplyDetect. And this is basically where we have a set of microservices that will ingest data, will ingest free text, and it will produce structured data that can be used when onboarding customers or when processing transactions. We're going to go back to our friends at Kafka and throw on another Kafka queue, and then we need to put it in a database somewhere. And so the first place we're going to look is MongoDB. So for those of you that don't work with MongoDB, it's a NoSQL database. It's a clustered-based system as well, so it's scalable. It can work on distributed systems, and it's very effective for this because being a NoSQL database, we can add JSON documents to it, and it will store the JSON documents, and so we can build up a huge database of information about financial crime. We're also going to throw our information into Elasticsearch, which allows us to analyze the data, to search against it, and such like. And so this is really useful for our machine learning team and our data scientists because they love to get in and to have a look at how well their algorithms are working and what they can do to make it better. I'm going to touch a little bit on how we train our detectors. So we throw hundreds of thousands or millions of annotated samples at our machine learning algorithms to train them up. But we don't do this all at once. Essentially, a machine learning system is there to make a decision in the way that we're using it. And so is someone a politician or aren't they a politician? And a lot of times, it's as clear as day. It's so obvious to the algorithm whether or not someone's a politician, and it's easy to make that distinction. But sometimes it gets a little bit hazy, a little bit fuzzy. We think they're a politician, but we're not quite sure, or vice versa. And this is where we need to do our training, right at that decision boundary. And so what we do is we get a bunch of samples, we train our algorithm, we set it up, and then we use that algorithm to generate more training data, and so that we can find out what samples it needs to know about at the edge of that decision boundary, so that it can make better and better decisions where the data and the evidence isn't quite so obvious. And so we go through this cyclic process, improve the model, use that to generate more samples, collect more training data for it, and train it again. And in this way, we can build up a highly accurate system. So I showed you before, your standard screening provider using 200 analysts can go through 24,000 articles in a day. The system we've built goes through 20 million articles or 20 million documents a day. You know, it's more than 800 times the scale of the manual process. And this is why technology is such an important tool for the job. As we're generating and creating more and more public data on a daily basis, we need to use this same technology of distributed systems and machine learning and natural language processing to analyze that data and to capture it and to use it in the fight against financial crime. Okay, I've got Philip getting fidgety in the front row, which is fine. I'm pretty much finished. Thank you very much all for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it interesting.
Thank you very much, Luke. That was fantastic.